Yep, we have a quorum. There we go. We have Tom. Yep, here we go.
Okay. He's there somewhere. Oh, and Alfredo. Okay. Tom, you're there, right? Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is the Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021 meeting of the Council's Planning, Economic Development, and Land Use Committee. Committee members present: Alfredo Ballerin, Councilmember Tom Hoey, Councilmember Judy Doche, and myself, Kathy Fahey. And I know Councilmember Joyce Love is having some technical difficulties and plans on joining us. Other council members: Councilmember Richard Conti, and we also have Councilmember Ginny Farrell, and we have Matt Peter and Jeff SPERRY from the Albany Parking Authority, and we have our staff, John Raphael Pichardo, and our city clerk is here helping Joyce get online, Danielle Gillespie, and we have planning staff, Brad Glass. Council President Corey Ellis is also here. And so we'll start tonight. We're going to be doing a few different things on the agenda, but we'll start with the reappointment of Jeffrey SPERRY as member and chairperson of the Albany Parking Authority. Welcome, Jeff. And Matt Peter from the Albany, what's your title, Matt? Director of the Albany Parking Authority?
Executive Director of the Authority.
Executive Director. And Jeff, I know that you were just here not too long ago for a reappointment. And this current reappointment is scheduled to go through January 2nd, 2026. And so we've all met you previously, but if you could just give us a quick update about your work on the Albany Parking Authority board. And you have to unmute, Jeff, when you get a chance.
Here we go. I've been involved with the Parking Authority now for probably 10 years, plus or minus. So I was a member of the board, and then became vice chair and then chair.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the prosperous times, and this past year has been a real difficult year for most businesses, and the Parking Authority was not left out in the rumble. We've had to do some major layoffs, and we're hoping now with some of the improvements in downtown and possible some new tenants coming in, we'll get back to some semblance of normality.
Mm-hmm.
Our revenues from have been down anywhere from 30 to 40% in the past year, and that doesn't include the number of parkers that we had in the garages that have not renewed their contracts or going out of business. So it's impacted us to do a lot of things that we normally have been doing in the past 3 or 4 years, and that's we've been doing a little work downtown as far as signage and murals and helping clean up the community a little bit. And this is really going forward now. To me, it's like we're starting all over from zero. We've got to go back and reinitiate all the programs that we have. We don't have the availability of the capital that we had in our finances right now, because we use that to keep alive and make our bond payments for the parking garages. But we're looking forward to it. We've got to Matt's a great leader. We've got a good team behind us. And we'll get there.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about all the layoffs. Can you give us an idea how many you do employ and how many you
Sure.
did have to?
Jeff, can I take this one? So, so we had temporary layoffs. We had about, we had 5 furloughs. They were brought back, but we are currently under a hiring freeze for the non-reimbursable positions. I say that because there's the enforcement staff that's reimbursed by the city. But for us, we have about 5 vacancies. On our non-enforcement side, we typically have around 18 to 20 individuals. Now, some of that is just, people we normally employ for, overnight shifts and things of that nature, but demand for events and other stuff meant that we just didn't renew the positions or hire as people left. We've been under that hiring freeze since March. We see that continuing. Our staff has done a very, very good job of operating what they can at the minimum. But it's probably between 20 and 25% of our non-enforcement staff is currently vacant. But again, we did bring back the individuals that were furloughed, but at one point we had an additional 5 individuals furloughed. So that was 10 total open positions, or nearly 50% of our non-enforcement workforce. And we still did everything we could to continue to provide the services that we do for the city.
Boy, that's really rough. So 25% of non-enforcement. And what was the extra percent, 50% that you referred to?
Especially during the shutdown, when we shut down meters and things like that between May and June.
Mhm.
I believe it was in April. It started in March, but then, as we shut down the meters for about a month and a half, we had some additional furloughs. So so we had 5 open positions and 5 furloughed positions. We then brought the furloughed individuals back, but we retained the hiring freeze. So again, we're still at about, for our non-enforcement staff, we're at about we have a vacancy rate of about 25%. At the height of the pandemic, we were short about 50% of our staff.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. And
can we get clarification about what kinds of positions are the non-enforcement staff and how many of those positions are there?
Yeah, it's between 18 and 20, depending on 18 and 20 total positions. The ones that are non-enforcement, that's our meter technicians, for example. These are, it's people who do our customer service. It's garage attendants, things of that nature. So that's the difference between enforcement and non-enforcement. It's people who handle the parking facilities, the meters, the tech, and things of that nature. So if that helps.
Thank you.
Of course.
Matt, are those unionized positions?
They are not. The unionized positions are the enforcement staff. That's the only union that we are working with, and they're represented by CWA.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, for the record, Councilwoman Love has joined us.
oh, good. All right. Welcome, Joyce. And Jeff, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, nothing pressing. Well, we're optimistic because we do know some possible moves in downtown, new people coming in for office space, and some more residential. So anything that helps us get back some of that revenue that we lost, just to keep our head above water, will continue to survive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll turn to committee members now. Questions by committee members? Judy? Oh, Tom, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Go ahead and let Tom go.
Tom, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Nice to meet you, Mr. Sperry. What's your feelings about unions? I noticed that you're on the Albany Medical Center board, and I know they've been trying to unionize there for a while. I'm just curious what your position is. I see also Capitalize Albany Corporation, and which is supposed to create jobs. And I know of several instances where unionized jobs were done away with because of the IDA money.
I come from a unionized family. I was in the trucking business, so I've had unions since I was 5 years old around me. I have no issues with unions as long as their demands are economically feasible. And I ran a truck. My family, I'm the third generation in the trucking business. I ran the business with my father for 35 years, and we never had a problem. We were Teamsters, but they understood our costs of operation and what we needed in a work ethic from somebody. And as long as they met those guidelines, we were very happy to meet their guidelines.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Matt, go ahead.
just to add, and just following Councilman Hui's question, our union, we just did a union extension agreement last year. Our contract is through 2025. We currently have no outstanding grievances, and the unionized atmosphere is great, in the parking authority, at least from management's perspective. And again, we have a really good working relationship with CWA. We think they're a great union to work with. And again, so our contracts are completely settled till 2025.
Thank you, Matthew.
Okay. Judy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sperry, for being here. How often does the board meet?
Meets monthly. The board meets monthly, and the operating committees meet monthly also.
And how long do those meetings last?
Committee meetings are about half an hour to 45 minutes, and board meetings are 1.5 to 2 hours.
Thank you. How many members are on the board?
There are 6.
Sorry, there's five board members, and then we also have our council as well.
It's where my 6th person is.
So, okay, 5 members, and the council is that a voting member or not?
It's
No.
not, it's just the person who handles our administrative duties for the board.
Okay. So just this afternoon, it was brought to our attention that there's legislation pending with the state legislature. I don't know if there's a bill in the Senate, there's a bill in the Assembly that would do some changes. One of the, and I'm interested in hearing a little bit about that. My understanding is that Mr. Peter may be providing us with some information, but it includes $5,000 a year compensation for the board members. We have a lot of boards operating in the city, and a lot of them put in a lot of time, 2-3 meetings a month, lengthy meetings, a lot of contact with the public, etc. So I note that you've been serving for 10 years without compensation. How would you feel about continuing to serve without compensation?
If it's getting more difficult to get board members to come and give up 2 or 3 hours of time, even if it's only once a month. I'm in constant contact with Matt, so it's a little bit different. I'm used to it. And sitting on the Capitalized Albany Board and Albany Medical Center, I spend about 25 to 30 hours a month at Albany Medical Center, so I'm used to being occupied. I think it's fair. It's not a large compensation package we're looking at. I think it would be fair for the board members and maybe give us the ability to step up our wealth of management within the parking authority.
Madam Chair?
I do want to answer to my question. My specific question to you, Mr. Sperry, is would you be willing to continue serving if there was no, continue to be no compensation?
Yes.
Thank you. Go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry.
Matt, go ahead.
Sorry, just a clarification. This allows us to give compensation as paid for by in the parking authority budget up to $5,000. It doesn't say it has to be $5,000. That number was taken based on what some of the other boards in the city currently compensates. And while it doesn't guarantee that each member will take 5,000 or that would do it, again, when other boards are given compensation, but some boards are asked not to get compensation, especially when this compensation comes from the parking authority's own revenues, not the city's. We want to make sure that those who are serving on boards, generally speaking, are compensated for their time equally. If no boards in the city receive compensation, then fair enough. But if some boards do, some boards don't, this seemed like an opportunity to at least make it equal to some of the other efforts that are going on, again, up to the 5,000, especially since it didn't come from city coffers.
Can I get your understanding of how much other boards are compensated from your research?
I believe the Water Authority and Water Board are compensated at $5,000. And that's where we took the number. We try to, again, it's authority to authority. It's another bond-based entity. It's generally the same fiduciary responsibilities and things of that nature. And again, it's an up to. It hasn't been decided, assuming this passes, what people will be compensated at. Again, we just took the number of what we thought was the closest type of authority to the general hours of time plus the amount of fiduciary responsibility, and we tried to make it parallel.
So the reason why I'm asking is because I agree with your statement about being unfair to compensate people who are putting in a similar amount of time for their board service and not compensating others who are putting in a similar amount of time. And so I was hoping, since you indicated that there's other boards, I'm aware of the Board of Assessment Review getting $3,000 a year. Can you tell me about any other boards that you're aware of?
I believe the planning board and the zoning board do get some compensation, but we didn't really look at that. We looked at other entities that do bonding and were authorities, but I believe they get compensation as well.
Yeah, and I found that interesting. JR mentioned that both of those are compensated. And I thought I've asked that question of planning board member, at least one or more planning board members, and I thought that they're not compensated. I thought they told me that they're not compensated. So
that might be my mistake, but we specifically looked at the Water Authority for how we were looking at it.
Right. Thank you. Kathy, at some point, I assume you're going to have him talk about the legislation in general.
Okay, I want to get to other council members here. Committee members first. Alfredo?
Thank you. And thank you again, Mr. Spears, for signing up for difficult tasks and difficult times, because it's not an easy time to be in any position, leadership. I did have one question. So this year is probably one of our toughest years economically that we've seen, and probably since the Great Depression, where we've seen so much loss of jobs, opportunities, and shifting from the traditional office setting to the new remote type working environment. And some of this is going to stay. Some of this remote working is not going to. So the question is, with this new reality that we may not have as many businesses in the downtown area and in many of our areas where we have busiest parking, revenue coming from, what are some of your thoughts of how the parking authority is going to shift, to adjust to the changing times?
Our company is part of an international real estate firm, CBRE. And that we've done as many studies as most large real estate firms in the country and internationally. And we're still getting the same feedback that in order for some businesses to operate and function properly, it's got to be face to face. It can't be on a Zoom call or working at home. We're not seeing production go down, individual production go down. It's equal or better than it was. But in order to get some, in my office, being real estate services company, I had 17 employees, and we needed to talk to each other and bang comments off of each other all the time. And you get 17 minds together. If we're good at it, we can get 20, 23 different ideas. So I think that's happening. That's continually happening. I think if you're going to see more companies, maybe it'd be a variation rather than a 5-week you're out of the office. It might be 2 days or 1 day you're out of the office, and the rest of the time you're going to be working from home, or vice versa. We don't know the answer to that yet. I can tell you the bigger firms that shut down during the pandemic, some are still shut down, but they're tending to look at May to June to reopen. And we'll see what happens. My son works for Goldman & Sachs. He has been home since March 11th of last year. He is now going into the office about 3 days a week, and they expect by September to have everybody back in their chairs, because they're like us. They need that face-to-face comments and working with in their teams, and you lose some of that continuity when you don't have that personal relationships. What we're seeing locally is that lawyers, the law firms that shut down, they're now going all back. That's one big one. The state is now just starting to come back in. They used February as a begin month. They're saying April, everybody will be back in their seats again. And we've got one large company looking at downtown Albany for probably 120 people. And they're not downtown now. So this is new to downtown. They'll be in an office space. Our vacancy in the capital region in office space only went up 2.5% in the pandemic over the past year. What we're seeing now is that's getting whittled down a little bit. Some of the office space is being reconverted into residential or into I can't think of the word, but shared offices. Some of that's being done. I think that'll be very successful. We've had a couple out-of-town buyers buy buildings here in Albany that are all going to be shared facilities. So there's some gold, and there's still some gold in the area, and we see development coming back. But we as an authority, not only providing parking, but we're also mini developers to get people to come back downtown. So we've got our work cut out for us, but I think it's going to happen. I think it will happen within the next 2 years.
Okay, Councilmember Conti.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Sperry. So I wanted to get a little bit of, or explore a little bit more in terms of what the authority's thinking is. I mean, I'm going to somewhat the role of the authority and what your thinking is in terms of expansion and being more, let's say, proactive or active in the economic development role, which is what the legislation also touches on. It does expand the role or the ability of the authority, I think, to be involved in economic development initiatives that are not strictly related to facilities that the authority operates, and trying to use that. I understand the philosophy. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, and this was actually put in before we had the pandemic and everything. So I don't know if that kind of colors where we were last year versus when this was, this direction was being looked at versus where we are today and the opportunities. But that's kind of a broad question, but I'm just trying to get the philosophy of the authority and the board members in terms of that direction and what they see as the opportunities and how that contributes to potential growth, not just downtown, but in other parts of the city.
Mac, I'll start off and I'll turn it over to Mac. But when I became chairman of the board, I wanted to get everybody on board to look and see what we could do for the city of Albany. We either in economic development or additional parking facilities, wherever we could, because every time we can get somebody parked, whether it be in a parking lot, a garage, or by a meter, is creating revenue for the city as well as for the authority. So we are many developers, and that's where we were looking at our bylaws and saying, in order for us to branch out and try and help either the city or do some economic development of our own, we'd have to change our bylaws. I'll leave it to you, Mark, or Matt.
Madam Chair, if it's okay if I pick up.
Yes, go ahead, Matt.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilman Conti, for the question, because I think it's an important one. For us, we kept one of our biggest things, and as we started getting involved in murals and beautification projects, is our existing legislation was very, very sparing. So like, it's basically like, if it's not adjacent from a parking facility, we couldn't touch it. So logically speaking, if we see a crosswalk where we know our customers are going and it needs beautification and that would help us retain customers, we couldn't actually pay for it despite it being in our benefit and the city's benefit and the revenue. Let's say that there was a crosswalk, we could literally only pay for the part of it that's adjacent to our facility. We couldn't even pay for the whole thing. And then it's the part of grants that are coming, right? Like we've gotten 2 DRI grants and they're luckily adjacent from our property, so we're able to do it. But if we wanted to help the city and be a partner and even pay for some of the matching funds on things that would actually help the authority retain parkers and do that, we actually couldn't unless it was adjacent. Even like, and there's another part of this that's really important, which is that everyone, to a certain extent, I think there was thinking that parking needs to be exactly where people want to go. And that's a very, like, I think almost a little bit of a suburban mindset, right? That we always need plenty of parking right where people want to go. But there's actually plenty of parking potentially 2 or 3 blocks away. But in order for people to feel comfortable accessing that and then going to where they're going to go and expanding foot traffic, which of course helps the city, we need to make sure that there's murals, that the sidewalks are repaired, that there's lighting and things of that nature. And if the parking authority can take some of its revenue and help and partner with the city where it makes sense, and it still has to be parking, like somewhat parking related. Like it's not like we can spend money in the middle of nowhere, but if it's directly relating to getting people to and from parking facilities, we want to be able to, if we have the revenue, to pitch in as if it can fit that. And I think that was the important aspect of that. And that was sort of that mission statement, to your point, is how can the authority both make revenue for itself in the city, but also use any of its excess revenue when available to do infrastructure improvements that help the long-term stability of both the area where we are partners in, right? Like our garages are just not the garages in the direct area. Anyone who's coming into our garages are walking throughout downtown. And the better the experience for the parker, the more likely they'll come back they might come back to live in the city, work in the city, things of that nature. And again, it's just our ability to not as be so defined and limited that we could only help out in the direct adjacency, but we could really expand our ability to help the city when we had the revenue to do it.
Does neighborhood revitalization in any way fall under the definition or rubric of economic development?
I believe it does. And for example, like what we've been doing in some of the lots and things of that nature have been, better fencing and beautification efforts. Our hope is that once revenues come back, and again, our revenues are severely diminished, so this might be a couple years until this even matters. It's like the tree planting initiatives, right? Making sure that trees and green space are part of our initiatives next to our meters, right? Meters are not the most attractive, but if there's areas that look more walkable, including murals that neighborhoods want to see throughout it, helping put EV chargers in, lighting in, things of that nature, directly around our garages. For example, we did LED lighting where there were issues with it being too dark and we got complaints that it was uncomfortable. I hope that's something we are able to do. It would still have to be where there were meters or where there was a garage facility within reason. But like we want to be partners and we want to do as much as we can when we have the revenue to do it.
So I assume your reserves have been significantly diminished because of the lack, and which puts you in a very different position now than you were a year ago.
That's correct.
And really puts restrictions on your ability to do more things like this.
Yep.
And I don't know when we don't know when that's really going to turn around.
Sure.
And that you might be, downtown's going to come back in a way that will increase your revenues. Just into the long term, do you have any, is there any thought or plan for additional garages anywhere? Or is that something that you're looking for alternative parking options?
Well, there's two different potential, and nothing is planned yet, but we did a parking study. I want to say 2.5 to 3 years ago about downtown and the warehouse district. And what it basically said was that the current level of parking downtown is fine. If there was substantial development, let's say in the parking lot district area or something like that, there would have to be some additional parking facilities considered. Our big issue is that it's a balancing act because our revenues are purely meter and garage based. And while we do not get parking ticket revenue, we obviously manage the enforcement, but we're only repaid for our expenses. So it's that difficult thing of where we can't subsidize parking too much or else we can't afford to buy and repair facilities. But we want to be partners in development. And one of the parts of the later legislation that I think we'll get to in an overview talks about expanding our bond capacity because the established bond capacity was done in 1984. And so, for example, a modern parking garage costs about $35 million per garage to construct. And that's assuming you have site control and there's no issues. And 2 of our 3 parking garages as it is are more than 30 years old. Now they're in good condition and we have a good repair plan and we have, we're able to maintain them, but it's not lost on me that things above 30 years, that's typically the shelf life of a garage unless substantial repairs are made, and we've made those repairs. But we have to be ready in case we need to do either substantial repairs or we need to replace those garages. And that's something that's very important and key on our mind moving forward.
I know one of the issues that we sometimes come into, and I think Councilmember Love actually has had this issue in terms of some of the downtown development and some of the where there are meters in neighborhoods that tend to create problems for residents who live in buildings that are apartments that are not one of the newly renovated or revitalized, but it might be older apartments, and they're not in the permit system. They're not necessarily near a garage, but they have a real parking problem because there just isn't any parking. And I don't know to what extent the authority can play a role in trying to do that. I think with new developments and the conversion of downtown office space, there's some involvement there in terms with those new apartments, working with the developers to create that space. But I think in this case, we're talking about, smaller units that have been there for a while. I'm thinking along, Elk Street near City Hall, Pine, those areas, which are always a problem. I don't know what and all those streets are now metered. So the residents are put at a distinct disadvantage. I'm not sure what role the authority could play in terms of trying to deal with some of that.
Well, I think it's always going to be a little bit of a conflict, and I think this is most downtowns that where it's metered and you need certain turnover, especially with, it being so close to the Capitol and things of that nature. Like, no new meters have been put in any like purely residential areas, so like the meters have been there for quite a while. But it is sort of the conflicting issue, right? Like, what do you do as an area becomes more and more residential, and it does increase. Now, the best we can sort of do is try to make sure that where we can expand the residential permits, we can. We obviously can't do that where there's meters. You can't charge someone one thing and not someone else something else. But we do offer discounts for residential parking in the garages and lots to try to make it as affordable as possible. But that's really the limit to what we're able to do. We're consistently looking at if other cities are trying to do it. We do end our meters relatively early, and we don't do it on weekends. So for example, in downtown, our meters are 8 to 5. The other areas it's 8 to 6. No, we don't have the meters out on the weekends. So we try to be as thoughtful as we can on that. We just don't really have a solution. And I completely understand the pressures that are back and forth, and there's no easy answer to that. I wish I had a better solution, but I don't at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I want to move things along, but did you want to briefly discuss the status of the legislation, Judy? I know you wanted more information on that. Matt?
I'm happy if the council members would like to go through it quickly and just how we came up with the changes, and if that would be helpful.
Just real quickly, if you could.
Certainly. So there's 3 major changes in our enabling legislation. And we had discussed this with council leadership last year, just to let them know sort of what we were thinking, why we were thinking it. I believe it was discussed at caucus maybe last year. I wasn't there, but I believe it was. And I apologize if I have the wrong information, but we did talk to council leadership last year, just because there's, again, the 3 major parts. The one I sort of explained, which was we wanted to make sure that if we have the ability and the finances, that we would be able to help out city initiatives that also improved the experience of our parkers going to throughout the city. So while still related to parking, it allowed us to potentially help when we have the funds on infrastructure projects, sidewalks, bike lanes, crosswalks, beautification, neighborhood issues, things of that nature. Because again, we want to be helpful if we can. It also helps our long-term bottom line. The more comfortable it is to walk, and it's part of, again, it's viewing parking as part of an ecosystem, right? If someone has a good experience parking, but then a bad experience walking to their destination, they're not going to park again. We lose on revenue. And we really see that as an interconnect. The second part of it is, again, just allowing our members, if so done, approved by our board, to receive a stipend similar to what the water authority gets. Again, that's an up to, not an exact. And it could be that our board votes that they don't want to do that. It's just giving us the ability to do that. The third and final part is expanding our bonding authority. Specifically, I apologize, just came up. Right now, our aggregate principal amount is 50 million. We would like that to go to 75 million. And again, I sort of bring up the fact of, if 2 of our garages need to be bonded at the similar time, or we need to fix up one of our garages while trying to build another one, that would completely eliminate our bonding authority. We couldn't actually build it even if we had the revenues to support it. The original bonding amount was established when we were, I believe, in '84. And so, obviously inflation and other things and expenses have gone quite a way up. And that's sort of just the other part to it. And again, our bonding has nothing to do with the city's finances, in so much as that our bonding is purely based on our revenues and our bond rating. We fail or do well based on our own. So I just want to bring that up as well. But those are the 3 major changes that we are looking for in this legislation.
Okay, thank you. And Judy, did you have a quick question or comment?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, does that require a home rule message?
It does not.
Thank you.
Okay, so we really appreciate that you are here tonight, Mr. Sperry and Nat, and thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to ask the committee if they have a motion they'd like to put on the table.
Yeah, I'd like to put a motion on that we approve Mr. Jeffrey Sperry for another 5-year term with a favorable recommendation.
All right, and do we have a second?
Second.
All right, from Councilmember Love. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes, and thank you again to both of you for coming tonight. We really appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
For the discussion. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to apologize, Kelly. Our Councilmember, President Pro Tem Kelly Kimbrough has been here as well. And now I see Brad Glass is here, and any other staff, Brad, or is this just you?
Just me tonight. I'm just going to fix
Okay.
my lighting situation.
All right. Okay, I was debating on which we should start with here for the technical amendment ordinance 46-122-20. Where do things stand then with that, Brad? It looks like we're ready to move forward.
Yeah, I think we have general consensus. We were able to run a, it's not really track changes, the PDF version of track changes, a compare of the original PDF document that I think we had all been working on from 2020, February 2020, to the one that General Code sent us this year. And we really didn't find many, if any, inconsistencies there. There were a lot of notations that showed up, but that was mostly due to content and formatting within the document. So I do believe that the February 15, 2021 version is incorporating of all the discussions of this committee and is an accurate representation of those in it, as well as the additional code that was adopted in 2017, as well as all the amendments that have been passed in the interim period.
Okay. Well, if any comments by committee members on that? Judy, go ahead.
So I completely agree with everything that Brad has just said. I was really thrilled that he was able to do a compare of the two documents so that we could have confidence, considering there were discrepancies in the labeling of the document. But I am also confident that this does reflect the code version with the technical changes that we previously reviewed, along with the edits that we then recommended, and also the changes to the that as a result of legislation that has been passed in the last 4 years. I think that there are two housekeeping questions that I have before we actually move to pass this, and this is, I think, directed at JR. JR, you mentioned something about seeker, and my gut is that this committee doesn't need to have that particular seeker document approved by us for us to vote this out with a favorable recommendation. Am I correct about that?
No, I just have to have it prepared for the county referral, and then once we hear back from the county, then it goes to the full council.
All right.
And what was the timeline on that, JR?
In terms of
vote by the
vote,
county?
well, we still have to have a public hearing that once we get this moved out, I believe myself and Danielle will work with you, Kathy, to get this scheduled for a public hearing.
But as far as the county planning board?
Yeah, no, it's the county planning board's due date is next week. So once I get the part 1 secret form from Brad that he said he'll probably have it to me by tomorrow, I'll get it to them, and then it'll be on the March 18th meeting of the county planning board.
Okay.
which that's the same time we meet, right? Is that the same time we meet?
Is that a
We
Monday?
meet the 15th, I believe.
Oh,
They're usually in the afternoon as well, the county meetings, I think.
Yeah, they're usually in the
little bit earlier.
evenings. Yeah.
so we can't act on this until our April meeting, correct, JR? Because we need to,
Correct. We can't wait. We
Right.
can't act until the April meeting.
unless the county board in some way, shape, or form tells us that they don't care about these amendments and that it's not within their jurisdiction. If they make that ruling,
Then
we
we're
could-
good to go. It's
Yeah.
they either defer to local consideration or they just don't give us a response after 30 days.
Okay, whose puppy is that?
That's mine. I'm sorry.
So
Okay.
the second housekeeping question is, there are provisions in the USDO that talk about what we're supposed to do, what findings we're supposed to make when we pass something like this. I think because all of these changes are essentially clarifying changes, I don't think that there's any issues with that. But we have done that for some of the USDO, and I am not sure that I adequately covered those when I did edits to the sponsor's memo. I think, though, that we can pass this out of committee with the understanding you're going to take a look at all of that before it's actually acted on by the Common Council, and have those do up those findings for us. Maybe
You're referring to the decisions that I've drafted, those draft decisions?
Yeah.
I could do, I can do something for that because it's technically a repeal and then a reemplacement. So it's kind of like, it's a unique situation.
Right.
Okay, well, we can touch base again about that and see what we need to do. But if that's not going to hold us up,
No, it won't hold us
Pulling it
up
out of
because usually
committee.
that's usually that's something after the public hearing that I have
Okay.
ready.
all right, any other comments by council members? Committee members first. All right, I see no hands. Is there a motion on, Alfredo, motion on the table? Or did you have a comment?
I just had a quick comment. I want to thank Judy. I want to thank Brett. I want to thank everyone that's worked on trying to get this pushed through over the last few months, and everyone that went through this process. My only question I have for Brett is, so what, March 3rd today? And I know last time we spoke, we said April 1st. Is that the date we're still going to be sticking to at this point?
I think we should probably talk about that tonight. I don't know whether if this is an opportune time or if we want to wait till
Well,
later on.
I was debating on how long, that might take a little bit longer discussion, the timeline. Maybe at the end of your next presentation, we can have that conversation.
I'm okay
I'm
with that.
happy to do it.
I do definitely want to have that conversation.
We are going to.
Okay.
All right, motion on the table.
Motion to
And
adjourn.
I'll second it.
I'm sorry, Judy, Joyce.
To adjourn.
Oh, it's not to adjourn.
Oh, that's what you was.
No,
going
it's a
on?
motion to put forth the ordinance with a positive recommendation.
Okay, motion, well, go ahead. Go ahead, Judy.
I'll support your original motion though, because
Go ahead, Judy. Go ahead.
it's my wife's birthday. I'm in trouble already.
Oh, ordinance 46-122-20 with a positive recommendation, Joyce. You want to put that forth? And Judy, you were going to second it?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Break out the champagne.
Okay.
And I just want to say, Alfredo, thank you for always being the one to remember to say thank you. Really, and not just you, but there's others, but thank you for doing that. And thanks to everybody for all your work, particularly
All right.
you, Judy, and Brad. So thank you, everyone. So now let's move on to review of this, since we first passed the USDO. Brad, you sent out that memo, and maybe you can give us go over that memo, and I know you have a PowerPoint too.
Yeah, I don't know if I can share my screen or if it's typical for the council staff to put up the
Give me a
the
second, I'll give
documents
it
that
to
I
you.
shared. Okay.
Should be good to go now.
Okay, has everyone seen that?
Yep.
All right, so wanted to take this as an opportunity. One of the positive aspects of waiting so long to do our 6-month review is we have a little bit bigger body of evidence. It's not a huge body of evidence, but we have some caseload to take a look at in terms of projects we've reviewed. We do keep some data as we review cases to just sort of track them and see what the consistencies or inconsistencies, as well as to reflect on them for as we move forward with the code review, some of the issues that may be causing recurring problems. And so the basis for this was, the code speaks to an annual report to the council subsequent to the 6-month review. This largely uses that as a framework in terms of the information to be provided. List of area variances, use variances, conditional use permits, development plan reviews, as well as speaking to a couple items that were either left in flux or unfinished as we finalized the original code in 2017, and that was the issue of potential for accessory dwelling units, as well as the affordable housing provisions and incentives that were put into the code towards the end of that adoption discussion period. So the memo here is sort of rudimentary. I don't draw too many conclusions. I kind of want to just put the data out there, and there are some sort of comments based upon my experience having a little bit of a history prior to the code and how maybe things have changed since. So looking at area variances, one of the areas I think we've made a really big improvement with this code is the decline in the number of variants. If you look at the annual average prior to adopting the USDO, we were reviewing, we received about 112 area variance applications on average per year. That number has dropped to 19 with a low of 6 in 2020. And that's going from having 173 1 year back in 1987. So our data that we have readily accessible goes from 1987 or 1984 to the present date. Area variances are exceptions to the granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals to the physical and dimensional requirements. So we're talking about lot coverage, setbacks, building heights, lot area and depth regulations, parking, and various things of that nature. Where we were seeing a lot of cases prior to the USDO is, the proposed or the required lot configurations were really not consistent with the lot configurations that already are pre-existing in Albany. So if someone go to build a house on a 40 by 100 lot, it may not meet the setbacks, the lot coverage, or even a shed in a lot of cases, or a deck. The houses that are the houses on the property and the existing structures there were already over the allowable lot coverage. So literally any addition they wanted or a small improvement they wanted to make to their property, they would need to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance, sometimes multiple variances. It's time, cost, and money for the homeowner. There are variances that affect larger projects as well. Typically, we do our best, especially now, so that we have a code that speaks to what we want instead of, in some cases, what we don't want. Again, we're always working to perfect that, but typically we don't want to see people getting variances. They have to show some sort of a hardship or a relief to be able to apply for those and be granted those by the Board of Appeal. And just to look at some of the types of cases that we have gotten for variances, not uncommon. A lot of them relate to the dimensional standards that we were talking about, but getting into some of the finer details, front yard setbacks. We've seen a number where, properties are through lots, so they may have frontage on 2 streets. They may be 200 feet deep and there's a principal street along the front and a secondary street in the back. That's really not a functional street, but per the regulation of the code, they need to meet the maximum setback, or they need to be built within a certain distance of both right of way. And that's no always practical. So I think that's a issue that we can kind of clear up or try and clean up as we move forward with the amendments. Principal building height as well. We've seen a handful of those. A couple of them in particular were related to the half-story provisions that we have in some of the commercial districts. I think practically with modern construction, a lot of these are mixed-use developments, and they're doing a commercial use on the ground floor, residential above, or in some cases they're doing a level of parking on the ground floor. But there really aren't too many that come in the situation of half stories. So I think that's something we want to take a look at. We may also want to look at applying, a height in terms of feet as well as number of stories. I think that what some proponents or some applicants for the variances that we reviewed put forward was that a 3.5-story building, for instance, because of the mansard roof style, would actually, be taller than allowing an extra story, a full extra story, because again, the configuration of that style of architecture or roof structure. Practically a 3.5-story, the half story can accommodate up to 70% of the floor area as the full story. So, 3.5-story is really kind of 3/4 of the way to being a 4th story. But in any case, that's something that I know that we're going to talk about. Looking at signage, maximum sign size, I don't think there's really a surprise there that no matter how much we discourage some individuals, they're going to think that they need a larger sign, and in some cases that may be appropriate if there's a historic type of a building or type of a sign band on a building that accommodates a particular size sign. That may be something where a variance is reasonable, as well as a number of signs per frontage. There was a pretty significant oversight in our code as we drafted it with respect to multi-tenanted properties. Really, when you read the code, it speaks to, each property gets a sign of X square feet. Well, some properties have multiple tenants or multiple storefronts. And, does that mean that, if the allowance is 24 square feet and you have 4 tenants, that each tenant only gets 6 square feet, whereas the guy in the next building over gets 24 because he's the only tenant? That's not really fair. So the way we have been applying that is a per tenant allocation of the signage. And that's something that I think as we move forward too, another thing that comes to mind is, I think it's, when we make those sort of interpretations, in some cases, we need to do a better job of making sure those are documented and aware to everybody. A lot of those are pretty, I think, pretty respectful of the code intent, and they are, minor in nature, but, I think for transparency's sake, we do want to be a little bit more clear in the code as to when interpretation's been made, that everyone's aware of that, and potentially that there's an ability to that's codified in writing, and there's ability to, contest that in some form or fashion. With respect to fencing, maximum height and opacity, this really relates to corner lots. And Alfredo, I'd be happy to follow up with you. I know I might be being a little long-winded here, and I know that you said it's your wife's birthday, so if you have to jump off, understood. And anyone, feel free to jump in at any time and ask a question. So with respect to fencing, particularly, these all relate to corner lots, and as sympathetic as the zoning board is in a lot of cases to these, a lot of the applicants really don't meet the merits of being granted an exception. Variance is usually something that's for a unique circumstance, and really, every corner lot in the city has 2 front yards. In that case, what a lot of people think of as their side yard, because the side of the building is up against the right of way or a street, it counts as a front yard. So whereas everybody else has, a yard behind their house, it's clearly their backyard. Corner properties really don't have backyards, or they're not as large as a lot of people think they may be. I think a lot of homeowners are confused by that, and they want that privacy that comes with a backyard. And I think there's a balance because the fences do sort of obstruct the view shed of either a particularly nice row of houses looking down the street, or in some cases for safety as well. Is there someone or something that could be behind that fence that maybe you wouldn't see if it was a solid fence or if it was a higher of a 6-foot height. So that's something that, we should probably take a look at and have a conversation about, maybe, making some modifications there or fine tuning it a little bit to allow for exceptions.
Brett, can you just explain real quick what the opacity? Because I keep reading that in the code and I never understand what it means.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially like the level of solidity of the fence is another way of saying it. So 60% opacity, you're thinking of more like a picket fence. So it's only 60%, it's 40% you can see through it, and 60% is the solid, posts that are supporting the fence. Whereas a stockade or a vinyl fence is 100% solid fence. So on a corner lot, you're entitled to up to 4 feet and not more than 60% solid. Whereas in a back or a side yard, traditional back or rear yard, you're 100% opacity or 100% solid and height of 6 feet. Some reflections and conclusions, and just looking to the left, most variances, well, I guess maybe it's close to split, but I think it was like 37-32 or something like that, were approved versus not approved. And, some of the withdrawn cases, I think 9 of the withdrawn cases were cases where people concluded that they could meet the standard and requested their application to do so. So, in some cases, those would have been denied. But I think 37 speaks to the fact that, the board has seen some cases where someone puts forward a reasonable case. So what we need to look at is that a truly unique case, or are these recurrent cases that are happening in multiple circumstances that we maybe need a code amendment, or maybe we need to be tougher at saying no. In addition, some of the other things here, I got to move I'm looking. So again, I kind of spoke to some of this, but I think the Board of Zoning Appeals has played a really big role and a good role in really enforcing the standards. So it's clear that everyone is being treated fairly when they go before the board, and the standards are being equally applied. I do acknowledge that in the past that may have been somewhat more difficult because the standards didn't reflect what we wanted in every case. So it was much more easier to justify a variance because in some cases granting the variance was the better outcome for the city. Significant, I think I actually covered pretty much all of this. So, I guess I would just stop really quickly and ask if anybody had any questions on the area variance side of things. All right, I'll jump right into use. Nope, shoot.
So it's actually an observation. When I'm looking at the chart, the one that gives you the percentages of approval versus non-approval, 37% is mostly due to the fact that only 1 out of 7 of the fencing requests were approved. And I will note that that is usually going to be an interpretation that is adverse to an owner-occupied kind of situation, a small residence, and not a developer. Whereas if you look at the dimensional standards, there were 25 applications and only 7 of those were denied. So the percentage is closer to something like 77% or something like that have been, I think, or maybe it's 73% that have been approved. And again, some of those, from what I know about that, it favors developers, the appeals that are granted. And it might be interesting to actually break down, do a side-by-side comparison of when we're talking about residential 1 and 2 family houses versus other developments in terms of where the approvals are being granted.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I want to say I really appreciate how you've laid this out for us. It's great.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think another case with the fencing is, there were 7 of those. It wasn't, it wasn't really, they're not a unique circumstance. So I think that's another reason where the board sees these sort of identical cases. I do think, maybe speaks to the fact too that, oftentimes a 1 or 2 family homeowner, struggles to put forward the same quality or level of application as a developer can in terms of responding to the criteria. Again, I think we can certainly look at kind of teasing those out. I will kind of underscore that zoning is not supposed to be about the applicant, but about the use or the impact on the land. But that said, point taken, and we'd be certainly happy to take a closer look at that.
Great, thank you.
Use variances, I'm really proud of this slide. I think Richard Berkeley might say the same. Since the adoption of the USDO, there have been no use variances granted. I see use variance in most cases as usurping the council's authority to make an appropriate rezoning of a property where that's warranted. I think that's really a policy change when this is made for any other purpose other than a unique financial showing of hardship where the property owner truly has no other use for the land and that the board is granting only the minimum necessary variance. Like I said, looking back historically, those numbers were higher. I certainly took issue with some of those numbers, but there were practical difficulties of, a church or a school or a storefront in a neighborhood that couldn't be utilized because that was zoned solely residential and there were no options available to it. So when you were faced with, a church being, falling down or being torn down as opposed to granting a variance for a reasonable reuse, I think most people on the board, leaned towards the reasonable reuse. And maybe stretch the criteria a little bit, although I don't think that is the intent, and I think it is a slippery slope with use variances. So I do appreciate the Board of Zoning Appeals working closely with us on closing that loophole there, and as well as the code, which really kind of allowed at least some available options for those types of properties that, to make sure that they're not in a situation of getting a variance, because whether or not the variance was granted, that's time and money that has to be spent to, protect a resource that I think in most cases that we, all want to protect. So, any questions on that? Otherwise, I can move on. Okay, conditional use permits. A little surprised to see such a drop in the numbers here. Pre-USDO, we were at about 32 per year, and post USDO, we had 11 per year. So conditional use permits are sort of the in-between uses between something that's explicitly permitted and something that's not permitted. So something that would require a use variance, let's say. They're looked at on a case-by-case basis. I think the zoning law speaks to generally those, being approved with conditions, or at least, it speaks to their general compatibility, or that you could be compatible within a zone district, but there may be circumstances where it's not. I think there was a case recently, the Board of Appeals with a proposed Stewart's, where this was actually, forgive me, the planning board proposed Stewart's that wanted to do a vehicle fueling station in a mixed-use neighborhood center district, and the board felt, and that district at that location really wasn't designed or maybe the appropriate use for that location, given the purpose statement that was set forth for that zone district. So that application was rejected. However, well, I'll get to most of these applications were approved. So we should take a close look at that. There are some recurring themes here. One of the, I think, compromises that we made, and it's not that we don't support this, but I think it was an important issue for neighborhoods. When we adopted the code, was the conversion of existing dwellings, adding additional units. Those do in the RT and R2 districts, as well as I believe the RM district. So that's 2-family district, townhouse district, and multifamily district. You guys have been looking at the code, so you all know this now, but in any case, those require to add additional units a conditional use permit. And in order to apply for the conditional use permit, there's certain criteria that you have to meet. Otherwise, in addition to the conditional use, you would need a variance. So typically, most people don't apply if they meet the criteria. But I think, a lot of these are, in the RT districts, someone wants to add a basement unit in a single family dwelling. In some cases it had been there before, they want to put it back. So I do think we should take a look at if someone is meeting the criteria, and maybe we need to take a closer look at the criteria, whether or not they should have to go to the board for a conditional use for that sort of proposal. There weren't many recurrences otherwise. Bar or tavern, we've had some bars or taverns, sort of bottle shop style things that have opened more recently that are smaller scale, may not have the same type of an impact. So in some cases, we may want to look at whether there's a certain case where those can be as of right uses, as well as personal services in MUNE. I remember a case of a hair salon on 2nd and Avenue that had applied for a conditional use permit. Took them a couple months to go through the process, and they were basically had the whole neighborhood out cheering for them to open their business in the storefront. So that's something we want to take a closer look at, as well as I think we want to look at conditional use permits can be used in a way that allows a little more oversight or guidance into some of the uses that maybe have council members have been surprised are allowed by right, or in some cases may want to have a little bit more influence in. I think this is a tool that we can potentially use in that capacity. And for this too, we do have the average duration of review. For these, the average duration was around I don't know around 2.5 months. I think it was a little less than that. It's not an exact number. Somewhere a little bit more, somewhere a little bit less, but more consistent than development plan reviews, which we'll get at next. But I guess I'll stop and pause if anyone has any questions on conditional use permits.
I do. Thank you. So you mentioned that there are some uses that council members have been surprised are allowed as of right. Are there any in particular you want to that stick out at you that you want to highlight for us?
I'd like to think about that, to be honest. I had thought of the statement. I hadn't really thought of the particular uses. I guess I maybe turn that around and ask council members. But I think my greater point was that as we go through the code, there are tools that we can use to address some of the concerns that have been raised.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to make a note of it so that we do address that if there are particular ones that we can consider. So everybody put on their thinking caps about that one. Thank you.
Yep. Development plan reviews. So pre-USDO, we were at about 29 a year, and post-USDO, 34. So we're pretty consistent there. We didn't change the thresholds for requiring a development plan review too much when we adopted the code. We did create major and minor categories. A major category requires a public hearing and a planning board makes the decision, whereas a minor is a staff review that the chief planning official is charged with making the decision. Typically the same review, same criteria, and you'll see that as we go through the average duration for the review. We're actually a little bit disappointed. I think the idea for a minor review was for it to be a little bit easier. These are smaller projects. For instance, it's any new construction. So for someone building a single family home, they would require a development plan review. And that's really, if nothing else, it serves as a purpose to circulate that application to the various city departments and make sure that they're all aware and that the applicant is sure what permits they're going to have to get to tie into water and sewer, to grade the site and move dirt around, for stormwater retention, all those things that we look at. As you can see, the average project cost in the minor reviews was quite a bit less. I think we might want to take a look at those project reviews. There are a few that are in the major category that really are more similar in dollar value than to the ones in the minor category. And there may be a couple vice versa, but I think, for the most part, and I would say, I think there are cases where the planning board is very busy with applications and, they do, we get a lot of public feedback. And I think, sometimes you don't hear a lot from the planning board members because those are becoming quite long meetings. So I think we do kind of want to tease out some of the cases that may be going to the planning board as a major review that really aren't generating as much attention. And maybe getting them into the minor category might help free up a little bit more free time for them to do a more, extensive review of the larger projects that everyone has a particular interest in. Most of those projects that the planning board sees are residential projects. That's just the nature of, the development situation in Albany. I did note too that there are some commercial industrial projects that are outside of the city's jurisdiction. I mean, a good example would be the E-Tech building, very significant building that, would have bumped this square footage number up quite a lot had it been included. But, this is a state project that, while we are often notified or consultant that review is taking place on the state level, it's not within our jurisdiction to bring before the planning board. It's not our decision to make. And, also noting the new construction outpacing rehabilitation, and that's primarily due to there's a lot of rehabilitation projects, 2-3 family dwellings, rehabs, fit ups of office space that don't require development plan review. So that isn't included here. That'd be a more question that you'd have to get from maybe building permit data. Could certainly look at that, but I think the important thing to convey here was just the types of projects that the planning board has been reviewing, so that as we go through the code review and update, we may be taking a closer look to make sure that, if we get pressed for time, we're addressing the things that are going to matter most and have the most meaningful impact. Development plan reviews. So the general framework development plan review is geared towards endorsement of projects that comply with the standards. It's essentially a site plan review. Are you putting the building in the right place in the site? Does it have appropriate sufficient water, sewer, other service capacity to support the use? If you get to a development plan review, that means you've already checked the box. If you don't need a variance, you don't need a conditional permit, you don't need area variances related to the dimensional standards. So I think in some cases, this is where we've had a little bit of consternation with some of your constituents and with the community. When projects come before the board for a development plan review, in some cases, this is the first time that people have seen them. And, I think people feel that they're just, the planning board is not giving it enough attention, or that it's just a thumbs up, thumbs down process. It's really not the case. So again, that's looking at, what do we want to, we do want this to be a seamless process. So we want to make sure that the projects that are getting to the board are projects that we want to see approved, because that's generally the outcome of the development plan review process. And I wouldn't expect it to change. That's generally been the case in Albany since the inception of the planning board, so far as that I can tell. Just quickly go through some of these. I think mostly this is a summation of the prior slide. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Okay. So as mentioned in the intro slide, the council did include an inclusionary zoning provision in the adopted USDO in 2017. That provision requires that for projects 50 units or greater, 5% of the dwelling units be set aside at least 100% of the, at not more rental value than 100% of the city's median income. There is a distinction there. Most of these calculations used area median income. The city's median income is lower than the area median income, so that 100% figure is it's relevant to consider whether you're tying that to the city or the area median income. Also a list of projects that have been subject to this provision. There was a 6-month sort of period when the code was adopted that this provision was not applied pursuant to the code. But once we started applying that, there were a fair number of projects. Some of these have not been fully constructed or occupied. In fact, most of them have not. So we're only recently getting into the administration and enforcement aspects of this policy. I do
Do you
have a
know
few
how
notes.
many have actually come online?
Yeah, I think 16 Sheridan and 1 Steuben are online. There are some others that are under construction. But I think it may be 2 of them, Richard.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And, one of the things that the code didn't really speak to when we passed the provision would be what would be the guidelines for sort of enforcing or even interpreting the provision. One can easily build studio units that, fit within that category and meet the criteria without necessarily lowering the rents all that much. That is potentially affordable housing, although people have spoken to needing more 2 4-bedroom apartments, things of that nature. So when we did put out guidelines last year, we did qualify that the units set aside for the inclusionary housing units had to be commensurate with the overall unit breakdown within the property. So that will be a part of our enforcement guidelines moving forward. I do think we need to have a conversation, particularly if there's a desire to expand this provision about administration and enforcement. That's going to occur through ACDA, so I can't speak to that all that much, but depending upon, how much this program is utilized, there could be a significant enforcement responsibility there. And also wanted to just stress the limits of this sort of policy. I do think we need to talk about a multifaceted policy to create more affordable housing, which is a nationwide issue. The costs of construction are really outpacing the ability of people to pay for the houses or the rent or the units and the rents that those are required to offset that construction. So in a lot of these cases, there need to be subsidy. And in the case of inclusionary housing, it's really an internal cross subsidy. So you're lowering rates of some of the units, and to make up for that, you're typically increasing the rates on some of them. But there's a ceiling on how much you can increase the units that you're bringing up. So I think that has to be considered, and I think particularly the lower end of the income scale, 30% of AMI, there's a pretty significant need in Albany for that type of housing that meets that need. And the amount you would have to raise the units to make up for that low number, is very difficult. I mean, those are typically units that are gotten at through federal housing programs or low-income tax credit financing, and we do have a number of those in the city too. I don't want that to be lost. In fact, some of those on the list here also are solely affordable units. I'm thinking of
Richard, did you have a question? I see your.
Yeah, I think you're answering the question, because my question was, some of these projects, aren't they entirely affordable?
Well, yeah, and it's not clear.
25 Delaware Avenue.
Right. Are we doing the administrative paperwork for those if they're, essentially tied to a state tax credit program that requires them to be affordable? I think we should maybe just articulate in the code that should they provide X, Y, and Z documentation that, they're regulated through another agency at those rents or lower, then maybe, that doesn't fall within under our oversight.
Right. But they are, so that there's in effect more affordable housing here on this list than what you might have as
correct
units.
Yeah, I'm speaking to
Okay.
merely what is required as a result of this provision.
Right.
And we do have an additional provision that provides an incentive of an additional story on your building for 20% of the units at, I believe, 80% of the median income. No projects have taken advantage of that so far. I think some of that may have been because there are other incentives that are easier to meet, such as the green blue roof incentive, which has been adjusted, and the blue roof component has been taken out entirely. But even with that change, we haven't seen anyone really taking advantage of this. So the question is, is it not beneficial enough, we should probably revisit that and maybe craft an incentive that it does sort of generate. I think the goal here is to use incentives to get favorable outcomes. When we wrote the code, this was very much a green code. So I think a lot of our incentives spoke to sort of green initiatives that we wanted to encourage, but that's certainly not the limitation of incentives. There does become a point where no incentive is great enough, though. So some of these problems can't be solved through zoning as the only tool. And then this is sort of in between here, accessory dwelling units. This is something that we looked at when we initially put forward the USDO. These are relatively small sized units that often can be accommodated within existing dwelling over a garage. In some cases, it involves the construction of a small structure in a rear yard area. It is one way of getting at affordable housing, particularly in single family neighborhoods where a lot of units of these sizes don't exist. And the barriers to entry, the cost of development can be quite a bit higher. The land acquisition cost can be higher. In addition to, a lot of times the infrastructure is already really there, so it can be more cost effective to, and less, impactful on the neighborhood. It's also been put forward in some cases. There are a lot of other benefits that could come of this with respect to, homeowners, being more easy to pay their mortgage or to accommodate a family member, for an older resident to potentially move into the ADU and, rent out the house. And I think there are a lot of concerns that have been expressed too. So we kind of left this open-ended as something that, with the right standards might be able to work. There is state legislation also that's been introduced. I still don't know whether, the viability of that legislation, but, that is something to kind of look at as we move forward, how we're moving with respect to the state policy. And the state policy, as I read it at the most basic level, essentially overrides the community's ability to prohibit these types of units in the essence of creating affordable housing and opening up some of those sort of alternative living opportunities that I was speaking to. That said, that's all I had for the presentation. I'm happy to take some questions. And again, I tried not to draw too many conclusions, but I'm happy to dig deeper into the data if anyone is looking for additional information.
Anyone have any questions or comments? I know we're going to get into a lot of this as we go forward, but.
And I did.
Judy, I see you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for a very clear presentation and helping tee up some of the issues that we should be looking at as we move forward. And I know that there will be other tweaks and that kind of thing, but that was great. Thank you.
Sure, and I did want to add, and I see Richard has a question too, but I did want to add that we were able to put together a map that kind of shows all the various projects and where they're located in the city. So if you want to get an idea of what type of projects may have occurred in your neighborhood, or types of appeals that any information on the individual cases, feel free to follow up with us. We can get you that information. And I think moving forward, that's something we want to have on our website for ongoing projects, so that residents can see those and track those, and rather than having to know a project case number or something of that nature.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, just a quick observation on the accessory dwelling units. And I do recall having some conversation with the assessor a while back on this topic, but I do believe that there is an impact there on assessments or assessed value for property. And I'm not sure to what extent that's been discussed or considered or anything like that. Just an observation. It does have some kind of an impact depending on how you do it.
Yeah, no, that hasn't been discussed. I do know there's a separate tax classification code,
Yep.
215 for those. So, that's one of the ways, a lot of people will have a concern about them turning into two-family dwellings and being rented out in the property in its entirety. I think that's one way to potentially prevent that from occurring. But also, another issue that I think Judy has brought up that I think it's inevitable that we talk about is short-term rentals, and that, if all the ADUs that were created were solely for the purpose to rent out an Airbnb, I don't know that's necessarily accomplishing the larger goal either. So, I don't know how you necessarily address those issues without, tackling both.
I don't know how you control the use. Once it's a housing unit, it's a housing unit. I don't know if you put restrictions on it. If it's only for a family member, or it can't be short-term rental or anything of that nature. But it'd be interesting to know how other communities have dealt with that issue.
Anyone else? Comments, questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Brad, for that review. And so now we'll move on to, I guess, talk a little bit about the timeline. You had sent something out, Judy. You actually went through and came up with dates, so I really appreciate that. I don't know if other committee members have had a chance to take a look at the timelines.
Well, I did bounce it to Judy and you, Kathy, I think first, because,
Oh, okay. Did everyone else
Judy does half my work for me, I think.
Well,
sometimes. So I'm trying to take advantage of that.
just notice the time she sends this stuff out. She's not sleeping.
Oh, I did it again, huh? I'm working hard.
It wasn't too bad.
So, yeah, for schedule, I think, kind of the most basic way to lay it out was try and tackle one article or larger chapter per month. And I think there are a couple that will take a little bit more, a little bit less. Judy had a really good suggestion of, maybe tackling 2 and 4 together, and going 1, 3, and then 2 and 4, which I think makes sense because there's a lot of consistent content between 2 and 4. I think there's a question on the start date is the biggest issue right now. The more time that we have to get prepared, the better. But we potentially could start looking at Article 1 later this month if that's that's something we want to do.
And we were hoping,
I'm open to
Brad, that we could pull the ordinance together to get introduced. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think the county is on the 18th. So whenever the council meeting would be that you can adopt that, I could get general code to push a button and have it go live. So that would be the easiest way to do it.
Oh.
That would be great if we could do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, Kathy was actually referring to something a little different. And that is, it's just as basic when you start reviewing something, it's good to put it on the agenda, get the actual, I want to say the cover ordinance. It's just basically saying, okay, so here we are amending this USDO to read as follows. You put in that template language, it gets introduced, and then we're essentially clearly putting the public on notice. We are starting this process of having these regular meetings to actually look at changes to the USDO to feed into that particular legislation. So it shouldn't be, I think between your office, JR, and Brett, it shouldn't be a big issue to get that just introduced so that then when we are scheduling committee meetings, we're referring to that ordinance, but then we're also talking about what provisions, what article in the USDO we are then looking at. So that's the thing that I put in my my memo past 11 o'clock last night.
So, it would be, you know, you would want to be as comprehensive as possible, but of course, it's going to, legislation will end up being changed as we move along and add and subtract or whatever.
No, actually, Kathy, I don't want to put Brad in a position where he feels the need to give us the entire USDO to attach to the cover legislation. I'm just talking about just introduce the cover legislation in the same way we do with the budget. You know, when we do the budget, we just say, you know, we're adopting the budget and we don't even necessarily have the budget or have any idea of how, you know, we're going to be tinkering.
Okay,
with.
so very skeleton kind of a.
Right. So I'm just saying that for us to start having scheduling meetings as a committee on this, ideally we would have that introduced, and to get that introduced at our next meeting, it would need to be drafted, I think, by this Friday, right, JR? Am I right about that?
Tonight, ideally. No, I'm just yes, the agenda is going out this Friday, so.
Yeah.
Can you help us with that, JR, get that moving?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
And it can, to some extent, you know, I don't know if we're gonna, I don't think our goal is to do a repeal and replace. We may wind up going that direction because keeping track of the track changes can be challenging in the documents, but we have, you know, essentially we have the existing ordinance for the repeal and replace, and it can be something maybe like that, you know, taking off from that particular legislation or the prior version of this legislation. Anyway,
So-
it's a technical thing that we don't.
So if people could take a look at, Judy, I thought you must have looked at planning board schedules and everything, because the dates look good that you picked. But I don't know if other committee members have. Yeah, I was having trouble even finding the calendar on the new website. So Alfredo and Joyce isn't here. Tom, I see you. If you could take a look at the dates that Judy set out. And you too, Brad, I don't know if you've had a chance to glance at them.
So I didn't send them out to the committees. We need to send it out to the committee.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
And
because of,
Brad, did you get them as well? Potential dates.
I got them, you know, I saw a lot of dates. I know we're gonna have a lot of meetings.
Yeah, well, they're not on planning board nights. They're not on.
right, so if I can just clarify, essentially what I've done is I've put forth a schedule that pretty much, once we get over the initial conflicts in March, we have kind of free sailing, pretty much picks the alternate Tuesdays to the planning board meetings, Brad. So we essentially, once every 2 weeks, we would be meeting to go over, you know, what you've presented, and then come back, you know, 2 weeks later with maybe some specific edits as a result of the discussions that occurred. I do have in here at least 2 meetings, and we do this for the budget as well. We make sure that we get in a couple meetings where
Council.
Yeah, where we're briefing the entire caucus, entire Common Council. And so I think I started one of those in July or, you know, for the entire Common Council.
Alfredo, Tuesdays were bad for you, weren't they? Or are they still?
They were bad for me, but now that we remote,
Oh. Mhm.
and that I'm in the office 2 days a week. That may change in July. You know, we don't know how that's gonna affect, you know.
So,
Well, we can make adjustments
yeah.
on the way.
Now to July, I'm okay.
so
Okay.
I've suggested June 30th as being one of the caucus nights for us to do a general briefing to the full council, and then another one on September 1st. And I'm hoping that by June 30th, we will be having something coming together and a clearer plan of action with regard to what we're doing. But that's, so I've thrown this out, and here's, the thing. It's, I want to reserve a whole bunch of dates. I think having 2 meetings, a minimum of 2 meetings a month is minimally necessary. I think once we start this process, then we will start to, should become pretty evident whether we need to squeeze in some additional meetings then in order to make this happen.
So the first date that we're looking at then would be the 22nd, March 22nd for the next,
No, actually,
first to begin that?
what I was suggesting is that is
USDO review of planning department specific
March-
recommendations.
Monday, March 15th for discussion of Article 1. Are you doing a lot of changes to Article 1, Brad?
No, but I think like for our stat, I just need to get a game plan worked out. I mean, the dates are helpful and, to sort of get a protocol in place internally, because I think, just given the night meetings and stuff, we may have to adjust some schedules, and just to get a schedule working internally. I mean, the 15th is pretty tight. I think the date I saw was the 22nd, which might be doable. I think like the first week of April would be even better, but maybe we meet in the middle.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
did you
that's
say
fine with me.
March the
Introduction of-
15th?
Yeah, you said March 15th?
That's a council meeting.
Yeah, that's the council. Introduction of ordinance. That's the introduction of the ordinance.
I
June.
have that now.
It is the 22nd.
Yeah, it is the 22nd.
So if you can take a look, Brad, and see if that's a possibility on your end.
And again, I'm talking about, let's begin and start with Article 1 at that point. And start the process for this. And maybe at that point, you'll have 1 or 2 things you also want to ask us about with regard to where you're going on Article 2 or Article 3, whichever, at that point, the big thing is I've thrown out some specific dates to get accomplished 2 a month, and and let us, get moving forward on it. How we then divvy up the work, what I've suggested there is, incredibly flexible.
And Brad, if you see these dates aren't going to work, let us know, or give us the feedback as to what might work on your end. And other committee members, please take a look. Alfredo?
March 22nd, I already have another commitment.
Okay, well, we're going to run into,
Yeah.
a little bit early on.
No, that's
people
okay.
with-
I just want to let people know.
Okay, thank you.
What
So
about,
Alfredo's pushing it back now. I just want to.
I'm not pushing it back. I'm just saying that one day I've already made a commitment, and I want to make sure that the committee's aware of that. I try whenever I make commitments months ahead of time, and then committee meetings try to fall on them. I try to let committee members know.
Yep. Judy did put out that Thursday, the 25th is open too as of at this point.
right? Yeah, so if you guys can give us some feedback, Brad, give us some feedback. And
We'll send that
I'm
list
open
out
the
to everybody.
25th.
All right, yeah, I'll give it a look. I haven't got into the details yet, but I'll get into it over the next couple of days.
So Kathy, you're going to send us the list because I have no idea.
I apologize. Yes, I
Okay.
thought you all were on it, but I guess not.
No, we're not.
So
Okay.
Judy,
should I forward it to just committee members or the entire council?
I think committee members, Richard, but include Richard, he's been a stalwart here.
I
I
already
mean, generally, when we schedule committee meetings, we prioritize the committee members, and then we let the rest of the council know. So it's just easier for us to get.
Well, we're just trying to schedule at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, and I did this.
I'm in that distribution too, right? Because then I'll cross-reference that with the meetings that are already scheduled for the other committees to identify potential conflicts, so you don't double book a night.
Right. When did I send this out?
Let's see.
Oh, I know what my problem is. All right. It's all in it.
Oh, yeah, here it is. Yeah.
All right, so I'll go ahead and send that out now to everybody, get everybody in the loop, all the committee members. I'll probably copy Kelly and Ginny too, so they have a clue as to what we're up to.
Oh, it wasn't too bad, 11:20 p.m. Okay. All right, I think that anything else we need to discuss tonight? Any questions or comments?
I move we adjourn.
Okay, second. Judy,
Enjoy, Alfredo.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Right, thank you.
You don't say nothing, you just get off.